This sentiment resonated with me about 5 years ago, when I was still bartending in a little seaside town in southern Oregon. I loved it there. It's a real laid-back community. I was 26, and yeah, everyone used to comment on how young I looked for my age. Slender build, dark-haired, kind of that girl next door type. It was a warm Saturday evening in late summer, and the bar was filled. I was working with the bar manager, Noah, and once the dinner crowd had diminished, he checked and saw we were running short on essentials, citrus, cocktail mixers, that sort of thing. So he told me he would. I make a quick run by a 24-hour supermarket some 10 minutes away from the bar. I agreed, without hesitating. The air was still warm with heat in the evening, and the store parking lot was half full when I got there. Over the entrance, the fluorescent lights buzzed, that weird noise that I always hated. I grabbed a cart, went inside, and started crossing things off the list. Lemons, limes, bitters, cherries, club soda, all easy discoveries. But everything changed when I reached the liquor aisle. There were two dudes standing next to the vodka shelf. They looked like they'd just crawled out of a rusty pickup truck. Flannel shirts, scraggly beards, messy jeans. My age, perhaps. They were talking in low tones to each other, throwing this strange intensity my way. And suddenly my gut told me something was not right. They didn't answer right away, but their eyes followed me back out into the room in a way that made me feel like I'd walked into a space where I wasn't welcome. I snatched a couple of bottles and cut out of the aisle without looking anyone in the eye. Working as a bartender teaches you how to pretend to smile, how to charm someone you don't want to charm, but when you're not working, that charm thins out. I just wanted to return to the bar. I hurried to the self-checkout lane and began scanning my purchases, but sure enough, the two men followed me back, choosing the station next to mine. With them closer now, I kept a better eye on them. One of them was tall, broad shoulders, sunburned, and a chilly gleam in his eyes. The other one was shorter and rounder and had these hopping eyes that did not cease at all. They were both grimy looking, like they hadn't bathed in days, and their eyes were completely bloodshot. If it was booze or drugs, I have no idea, but they were not inebriated. I glanced up and, by mistake, caught their attention. So I created a shallow, forced grin, the kind you create when you're trying to be friendly, but wish you might turn invisible. The tall guy leaned in close enough already and whispered something along the lines of, "Looks like you're party ready, huh?" I kept my reply short and surly. "Yeah, but not for me though." They inched closer, ignoring their own checkout terminal. The one who was short laughed, and the other who was tall went, "Oh, maybe it's for your boyfriend then, huh?" I gave them the same closed-mouth smile, expecting them to understand, but they didn't. The taller of them would not give up. "You might come out and spend the night with us. We'll have a real good time, if you know what I mean." I edged slightly, still recounting my things, trying not to get anxious. "No, thanks. I already have plans." He didn't take kindly to that. His attitude turned quickly, heavy, nastier. He leaned in toward me, close enough I could smell him, sweat and old beer. "I understand how it is. You must only sleep with doctors or wealthy men. Think you're better than us, don't you? We could show you you're not. Teach you a lesson." The language wasn't merely repulsive. It was threatening. I didn't glance at him, didn't answer, but in my chest was constricting. I adjusted my position ever so slightly so I could lean into my purse, which was placed on the scanner platform, and pretended to be searching for my wallet. Really, what I was doing was stealthily removing my small 4-inch pocket knife and shoving it up my sleeve just in case. All while ensuring the self-checkout clerk, a woman at her small station beside me, saw me doing it. I gave her big eyes, speechless, pleading without uttering a word. I went to pay, swiping my card with shaking fingers as the two men loomed over me. And then the machine malfunctioned. It started beeping. The attendant was right on it. She came over, and the instant she did, the guys changed their attitude like a switch. Suddenly they were grinning, acting like my friend, making dumb jokes, trying to act like we were all buddy-buddy. They even joked to the worker, saying I had to have been shoplifting, and the machine beeped for that reason. She didn't believe them. She stood well over 6 feet tall and had a stout build. You just know those kind of women don't tolerate any crap. She glared at them, jabbed in some buttons, and then spoke to me. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am," she told me blandly. "This machine's not functioning correctly. Let me ring you up at a standard register." She smiled and laid a light hand on my back, looking at me exactly the way I'd looked at her. She'd heard it all. I took my things and followed her to a register near the location of the store security office. The 2 men stayed behind at the self-checkout, still hanging over me like vultures. They finished checkout but did not depart. They stood by the door instead. The worker slowly ran my belongings over, her gaze never lifting from them. "Nothing wrong with that machine," she grumbled. "It just misread your card." But I didn't like those 2 when they were walking in. "I saw the way they treated you. I already called our security guard. He's waiting to take you to your car when you're done." Then she added, "And when I saw you pull out that knife? Good girl, I mean it. I was prepared to back you up, but I'm glad I caught it in time. I'll stall them a bit longer, just in case they're still outside waiting." I couldn't thank her enough. I told her what the guys had been saying, how they continued to push, and how scared I was. While I was talking to her, my phone rang. It was Noah, wanting to know why I was taking so long. I told him everything, and he was furious, wanted to go there right away. I told him to remain where he was. The employee and I had stood at the window. Yes, the 2 men came out but did not leave. They got into an older model pickup truck that was in the back of the parking lot, engine running, headlights shining directly at the front entrances of the store. The employee gave me that look like, "See?" I nodded with my stomach twisting into a knot. She pretended a few more minutes that the cash register was broke, buying us time. And then the security guard, this huge hulking fellow in his middle 40s, came over. The 3 of us walked out together into night. The lot was nearly empty except for that truck. They hadn't moved. But as soon as they saw me walking with 2 people, one a guard in uniform, they recognized that they'd lost their chance. They gunned the engine, peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching as they roared off. I could feel their anger from a distance. I looked at both the worker and the guard and thanked them over and over again. I have no idea what would have occurred if they hadn't stopped it, but I'm certain it wouldn't have been good. A few days later, I sat down and penned a lengthy letter to the manager of the store and their corporate office, explaining to them just how the employees had taken care of me and how grateful I was. I hope it got her a raise or a promotion. She didn't need to intervene, but she did, without hesitation. That night changed me. I never go shopping alone after midnight anymore, and I never will again. About 2 years ago, I worked a night shift at a small off-peak convenience store along the highway in a rural part of Vermont. I'm Natalie and was 33 years old at the time. Some people thought it was irresponsible for a woman to be working there alone so late at night. But to tell the truth, the store was so empty most nights that I never once felt threatened. And then, too, the state troopers had their headquarters right across the street, less than 30 feet from me. That alone made me feel like I was in one of the safest places in town. Even on a busier night, we'd have maybe 20 or 30 customers during an entire 8-hour shift. They were almost all regulars, truckers, delivery guys, and locals who just stopped by for coffee and a snack before going to early morning jobs. It was getting stale around 3:30. I stepped outside to sweep out the lot and check the outside garbage cans. It was normal. Something about being kept occupied made the time fly by. I lit a cigarette and plugged in one earbud so that I could listen to some good old 90s music as I worked. It was cold outside, and a fine veil of mist stuck to the ground. It had rained, and all still retained the smell of dampness. That's when I saw him. Across the street in the empty parking lot of the trooper's office, There was a guy standing there with his back to me. He was swaying back and forth, looking down, and for a second I thought he was just urinating on the side of the building. Gross, but not a rare event. The state trooper building closed early, around 5 p.m., and didn't open again until 7 in the morning. No one would be in to notice. I remembered seeing him before. That he wore a stained white t-shirt said a lot. He'd gone through the store a while back that night, maybe 4 or 5 hours back. I'd observed how he stared for too long, how he slurred out the request for cigarettes, how he'd smelled heavily of whiskey, and his hands waved about as he handed me a crumpled $5 bill. He had that creepy vibe about him, nothing you could document, but enough to turn your stomach. I didn't even look at him, just glared off in the distance and continued sweeping, hoping he'd not see me or return. It was working until a car drove into the parking lot. I remained outside as the car pulled in, attempting to be normal. The man on the other side of the road glanced at the car, then at me, then back at the car once more. His head crept slowly, but his eyes flicked. Something in the way he moved his body made my skin crawl. The woman from the vehicle bought a coffee and a pack of gum. She exited, and I trailed her behind, still holding my half-smoked cigarette, and we both glanced over at the man. He was shouting now, yelling, actually, but it was just yammering rubbish. No real words, like someone yelling in a dream. The woman appeared nervous and told me to watch out. I smiled and made some bumbling joke like, he ought to be more afraid of me, although my instincts did not agree. He was still there, but now he'd moved over into the road, standing directly across from the store. His body still swayed, his legs wobbly, as if he'd topple over at any second. But his face, that face unnerved me. There was something awry with his expression. His eyes were open wide, glassy, frantic, not upset, not blue, just completely crazy. Working late night shifts, I've always found it to be the ones with that kind of eyes. Those empty yet angry eyes. Those are the ones you have to be careful about. I still had almost 3 hours left on my shift, and no one else would be arriving for at least 2. I couldn't risk letting this guy in. I ran back inside and quickly made a temporarily closed sign. Just in case he tried to come in, I had no desire to deal with whatever drama he was experiencing. As I walked around the counter to post the sign, I saw him walk across the road. He had crossed over to my side now, stumbling into the parking lot. My heart fell. I did lock the second door just as he stepped onto the sidewalk. I glared him straight in the face and moved my hand across my neck, silently saying, "Nope, we're closed." I shook my head as well, hoping that he'd understand. He paused for a moment, then turned and started to walk away, but not quietly. He screamed something violent and loud, waving his arms wildly in all directions. I couldn't hear a single word, but the rage in his voice was unmistakable. That's when I actually started getting scared. This wasn't some drunk guy who was going to split and forget. This guy had a whole inferno burning inside him, and I did not want to be anywhere in the area when he went on. I called the police on the phone. Fortunately, they picked up fast. I barely had time to set the phone aside before he came back. This time, he charged to the door, yanking at the handle, pounding his fists on the glass. He stepped back and charged into it, trying to force it open. It rattled, but wouldn't yield. I yelled through the glass that the police were arriving. That was a terrible idea. As soon as I mentioned it, he ran, disappeared down the street like a ghost vanishing into fog. When the cops arrived, they searched everywhere in the area, the highway, around the buildings a block away, even the wooded lot 1 block away. There was nothing. No one witnessed him leaving. He was walking, and, he couldn't exactly go far, but they simply couldn't catch up to him. Since he did not actually harm anyone or cause any damage to property, they did not file a report. Neither did I. I stayed safe behind those heavy glass doors for the remainder of my shift, but the fear stayed with me. Once that night, though, I became acutely attentive to every single individual who came through the doors. Each night was a bit more weighty, a little more tense. I'd find myself glancing towards the doorway every few minutes, checking over the parking lot repeatedly even though no one would be out there. I stayed there for another 3 months before finally quitting. I don't think informing him was the right or wrong thing to do. Maybe if I said nothing, the police would have arrested him. Maybe not. I'll never know. What I do know is that I never want to feel that fear again, and I've never worked an overnight shift again. I used to work nights at a juvenile jail in a little town up north in Oregon back in 2019. I worked intake and the clinic, but most of the strange things just seemed to happen in the clinic. I wasn't new as a nurse, but new as a corrections nurse. Everybody who's ever spent time in a lockdown building knows that sound. When that heavy metal door closes, it's not just loud, it's final. That clang sticks with you. To get into the clinic wing, you had to have a key card or get buzzed through by Central Security. No exceptions. One evening, perhaps 5 weeks into the position, I sat alone at my desk, recording vitals and completing paperwork. Suddenly, that unmistakable loud click came from the heavy steel door just outside my office. It was the sound of it being unlocked from a distance. The door opened halfway, then shut. Now, my office setup was pretty open. There was a huge glass panes that offered full view of the hallway and entrance to the clinic. Of course, I thought one of the night officers was pulling something off. They were not quite a very professional group. I jumped up and simply went to the window, half expecting some dude to be waiting there smiling. But there was absolutely nothing in the hallway. Taking it that it was a joke, I rang Central. The person who picked up the phone sounded as if he was half asleep, as if I had roused him from a slumber. I teased him a little bit, assuming he was in charge. But he really had no clue what I was talking about. And this officer involved? He wasn't one to make jokes. He was a chilly, by-the-book kind of guy, with absolutely no personality at all. The more I thought about it, the more I started dismissing it as some sort of electrical or mechanical failure. Something shifted afterward, though. The air felt thicker, colder. I felt like I wasn't alone anymore, like someone or something was with me, observing. My skin crawled, and a knot in my gut started to set. I comforted myself. I was just tired and paranoid. Try shaking it off as I did, removed the stethoscope from my neck, neatly placed it on my desk, and shut the office after myself. Went across to the large medical room in order to catch up with the other nurses. I stuck there for a little while, trying to soothe myself on top of unnecessary paperwork and polite small talk. When I finally came back to my office, I immediately went to find my stethoscope, but it was not there. I checked on the desk, under it, in the chair, the drawers, nothing. I stood there, puzzled. I clearly remembered leaving it on the desk. I double-checked the door too. It was closed, and I was the only shift person to have a key. My nerves were gone by this point. I checked the entire room out, hoping I must have tossed it somewhere else carelessly. My office also contained a supply closet, a huge one with medical gear, paperwork, and duplicates to all of that. It was always locked, and I was the only one who knew the key to that too. I did not even think about checking there first, because there was no reason for it to be kept there. Maybe 2 hours later, I needed some gauze rolls for a patient scheduled to come in, so I opened the supply room. Dead center in the middle of the floor was my stethoscope. It hadn't fallen from a shelf. It hadn't fallen off a corner. It had been placed there. I waited there for one moment before climbing inside to get it. The instant I put my hand on it, the steel door outside clicked once more. It opened just slightly, then shut tighter than ever before. I locked the closet, locked the office, and stepped outside to smoke, trying to calm down. I could feel the perspiration on my hands even in the coldness of the nighttime air. I had a duty, people to care for, but I was rattled. When I did finally come back inside, the entire room felt different, warming, illuminated, more or less like whatever had been wandering around had left. When my shift ended, I asked Central to roll back the hallway security tapes. What I saw chilled me more than the actual events. The door opened. It closed. No one was there. No one was even close. The hallway was empty. I wish I could say that was the first time something like that ever happened. It wasn't. Every time after that, the slams grew louder, more intense. And every time it happened, that same suffocating sensation crept back, as though I was being stalked, watched, surrounded by something intangible and cold. More things disappeared. My pen case showed up 2 days later, not in my office, but in the east wing across from the girls' cells. My patient record notebooks were discovered jammed in the off-limits control booth of solitary. And once, my blood pressure cuff for taking out on the road showed up on a kitchen counter where inmates assembled their trays. Every time we reviewed the tapes, every time there was no one. And always me, nobody else. Those other night nurses never heard the doors. Their equipment never went missing. They never felt anything strange or cold or off. Only on the nights I worked did these things occur. Every longer-serving member of staff swore over and over again that they had never seen anything like this. Not ever. Not in all their years there. Eventually, I completely stopped sleeping in my office. I would take everything I would need for the night: files, meds, equipment, and camp out at the officer's front desk. I stayed there until my contract expired and I transferred out. Ever since then, anything similar to that has never occurred to me again. Not in the hospital where I currently work, not even when I worked on another short-term contract at another correction center. But I will never forget the sound of that door, the echo, the way it was calling my name without ever saying a word.